Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk once again about moving forward. Quite honestly, I believe that with the political assassination of Charlie Kirk, we have turned a corner, not just in America, but since America leads the world, in the world. This is something most definitely as significant as the assassination of Martin Luther King. And as I have said in a couple of videos in the last couple of weeks, I believe we are living through the photo negative of the 1960s. Whereas the 1960s was a time of political assassination, moving more towards your leftist ideology, your quote unquote progressive ideology, we're now in the reverse decade. And the thing is that my channel is not primarily about politics, it's primarily about heroism, and I touch on mostly entertainment. But again, I certainly believe that entertainment is part of the social fabric of human existence that needs to be there for healthy individuals and for healthy societies. So the question is, how do we move forward in this new world? And the answer, quite honestly, is to heroically abandon things which cannot be fixed and use heroic effort to create something that will actually endure, that actually has a sound basis, something new, which honors the old, and which we can build upon. And to discuss that in a more direct way, I want to talk about how not to move forward. Because there's a couple of things that happened over the last week. I usually like to draw what I'm talking about directly to what happened over the last week or month. So I'll begin there. So for those people who are used to my Wednesday night live streams, you probably already know this about me. The rest of you probably not. But right now, where I am situated in the world, I'm here because I'm one of the primary caregivers for my parents, and I want to be there for them. And they're not too far across the border in Canada, so that's where I am. So I get to watch a lot of this Canadian news, the local news from where we are, the national news from Canada, then the local news from where we used to live, where I was born, which I do believe is a CBS affiliate, and then the national CBS News. And I don't put a whole lot of stock in any of that, but it certainly is an eye-opener to see what the other side of the aisle, well, the mouthpieces of the other side of the aisle are actually saying. And quite honestly, a prime example of what not to do moving forward is basically what's going on in Canada right now. And I'll go into that for a minute or two because it's important. Well, first let me start here, because I said this a number of times and people really don't believe me. But when I was studying politics over 30 years ago in university, so this is early 90s, mid 90s, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, when all of the political bigwigs were saying, well, everything's just going to be part of the liberal world order now. Although they didn't use that term, that's what they were talking about. Everything's just going to become a Western liberal democracy now. And part and parcel of that was, how is this going to affect America? And the funny thing was, again, this is what the professors were talking about over 30 years ago. They would say, and were quite blunt about the fact that Canada is an experiment. It's the experiment of the liberal world order, wherein the liberal world order is going to, in hopes of changing America, first try the tactics on Canada because it's similar enough geographically and its people are close enough to Americans that if this liberal world order tactic works in Canada, then we'll move it on to America, at the very least the more liberal parts of America, and that way we steer America in the direction we want it to go, and America leads the world, and the world becomes more and more part of this liberal world order. And again, this is not me being a conspiracy theorist. This is not me pulling it out of my hat. This is me telling you what we were discussing in the early to mid 90s under the direction of professors in university settings. Now, jump forward to this last week, and there was this individual. He is the, I think, parliamentary budget officer, who is not part of any of the parties. He's basically an appointed accountant to look at the budget of Canada, basically saying that Canada, if it does not change significantly very quickly, is going to be a failed state. At the very least, a failed economic state. The basic gist of what he said was, if we're looking at the economic situation of Canada, sure, it's better than some places in the world, but it is absolutely shocking. And if things don't change quickly, then we're done. And the thing is that the current Liberal government of Canada has really no intention of changing things in that direction. It might make some hard choices as compared to the last 10 years, but it's not going to be anywhere near enough, nor in the right direction. Because, again, for those of you who don't know anything about Canadian politics, Canada is basically a 1.5 party system. There are some smaller parties, but they really don't matter that much. There's the Liberals, They are the one party, and there are the Conservatives who are the other half a party. And academically, you look at Canada this way because the Liberals are in power 3/4 of the time. And the Conservatives only get into power when there's a giant scandal with the Liberals. And what the Conservatives actually are, they're not really conservative. They're fiscally conservative, but they're not allowed to be socially conservative. That has been strained out for minimum 50 years. And so the Liberals would be in power for, say, 15 years, 16 years, screw things up financially, get themselves into hot water and a scandal. The Canadian public would vote back in the Conservatives. They would do something to rein in the fiscal problems, not change any of the social problems, and then slow the train down just a little bit so it's not going as fast when we eventually get to the cliff. And the thing is, this should have happened the last time there was an election. What was it, last year? There was massive scandals that would have toppled previous governments easily. There was financial ruin, which everyone could see written on their bank account. And yet, the people of Canada still voted in another Liberal government. Why? Because they are so indoctrinated now. Now, this is not every section of the country. There are certain very conservative sections of the country, but because of the way that the Canadian election system works, which is a reflection of the English one, which is first past the post, it doesn't matter. If you have massive sections that are conservative, they will get outvoted because Canada doesn't have something like the Electoral College. But again, the point is that the people are so indoctrinated into this quote-unquote progressive way of thinking now that it doesn't even matter. Scandal, they don't care. Financial ruin, even financial ruin in their own household, they don't care. They will still vote in the Liberal government. And again, even if they were to vote in another Conservative government in the near future, it's just going to put the brakes on everything for about 4 years, maybe 8. And then things will go straight back to how they were before, heading towards a cliff. Especially if a Conservative government was to do something like, let's say, defund the national broadcaster, which is basically nothing more than a system of apologetics for your quote-unquote progressive agenda. If a Conservative government were to do something as simple as defund that, you could see them never getting into power for the next 20, 25 years easy. Because that would be a socially conservative thing to do. A bare minimum socially conservative thing to do. And the point being that there is no righting this ship unless you do some of those things right now. Unless you cut some of those social programs. They've just ballooned out of control. There's no way, barring some massive international world change, that the economic collapse that the parliamentary budget officer indicated was coming is going to be stopped without massive cuts to the socialist progressive agenda that has run straight through the entire country. And the people don't want that. No matter how much it hurts, no matter how much they lose, they're not going to go for that. And so, what does this indicate? This indicates exactly what the parliamentary budget officer had stated. We're done here, as he so eloquently put it. Now, let's shift gears, move south of the border, talk very briefly about American politics, and see why there is such a great divide between the right and the left, and how there's simply no fixing this. And I think the person who has most succinctly summed up this entire last month would be a commentator who I don't place much stock in what she says, but every once in a while she gets things right. Her name is Shoe on Head. I'm sure plenty of you know who she is. And she said something which, quite honestly, if you're someone who believes in the pro-life movement, you understood this decades ago, but normal people are starting to understand this after the death of Charlie Kirk. She said, "This has pointed out to the normal everyday person that there is such a divide between the right and the left that they can't even agree on the fact that murder is wrong." And quite honestly, again, being in Canada, I have had to step into some conversations, especially over the last couple of weeks, and look the people in the eye and say to them, okay, stop. I don't want to hear that. Don't say that around me again. You wishing for the death of this individual is wrong. But what's my point? My point is there is such a divide between the right and the left right now that it is unbridgeable. And because it is unbridgeable, we have to recognize that the institutions, if they are not essential, but the institutions that are in full control of your quote-unquote progressive left must be abandoned. Just look at the statements of, what was his name, Mark Ruffalo, over the last couple of weeks talking about the cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel because of what he said about Charlie Kirk. Mark Ruffalo basically said, I don't understand what's going on here. None of my industry understands what's going on here. And I believe him. I think he's being 100% truthful. None of his industry understands what's going on here because they are self-centered and have no compassion whatsoever. And they don't understand that murder is wrong. And talking to them about things like financial statements and how they're driving themselves into bankruptcy, how everything is going to fail if they continue in this direction, which is basically the situation of Canada right now, which is why I led off with that. Trying to convince them of that is useless. Like the majority of the Canadian population right now, they can see through their lives, through their bank accounts, that things are not going well, but they're so indoctrinated into the ideas of quote-unquote progressivism that they will not turn around, even with the cliff now in view. For my own part, I came into this entire thing fairly late. I've made some acquaintances since then, talking about how the early forms of this began. One of those acquaintances would be John Wright, talking about the sad puppy movement. Another of those acquaintances would be Carl Benjamin, talking to him about Gamergate. I personally was a small part in Comicsgate, but for my section within Comicsgate, what they tried to do originally, well, Richard Meyer, which was one of the driving forces behind Comicsgate, he tried to start a movement. The first one was Move the Needle, which was to say, buy good comics and then promote good comics, even if the people making them don't like you. And he did that. And the people who don't like him, after he promoted their comics, attacked him viciously. So he moved on from there to build a spaceship, which is to say, we need to salvage every last thing we can because this planet is doomed. Basically, this industry is doomed. Get on a spaceship with what we can salvage and take off. And even that failed significantly, especially with poor Ed Piskor, who tried to do that, who tried to take some of what the old industry had, the good ways it worked, and pass that knowledge on to other people, no matter what their political stripe. He was pressured to a point where he ended his own existence. And even now, Richard is still trying to promote the idea of buy good comics. And I know this is a small thing compared to all the rest that I've talked about, but again, I think entertainment is fundamental to human flourishing. But at this point, no, give up on that industry if you still have any attachment to it, like poor Richard does. Give up. The same with Hollywood. The same with your favorite gaming company. The same with your local bookstore. Time to give up. Time to give up on these industries. They're not turning around. They have no intention of turning around. Not only that, but as I said, the cliff is now in view, and they still want to go faster. They're still cheering on the death of someone who was simply calling for civil discussion. And just as an aside, the problem with these people who are clinging on to the old, it's because I do believe that they believe that the only way knowledge is passed down is through experience and sharing experience from one generation to another. That's a very quote-unquote progressive way of looking at things. I would say no. No. You see, these things, if they work properly, like storytelling, like government, if they work properly, they're working in accord with human nature. And since we all have a human nature, we can figure that out. We can come back to these good points, even if we have to abandon those old industries. We can still come back to how these things work correctly without the need of employing those people who actually were engaged in a system of merit, let's say 50 years ago. We can do it. But again, it's going to take some heroic sacrifice and some heroic will in order to recreate those things. And that's the point. It's going to be hard, and they like the comfort of the old. I'm here to say, embrace heroic hardship. Now's the time. I've been saying this for years, but now's the time. Embrace heroic hardship. Build something new. Build something that will last. Be rational and compassionate and honorable, and stop, for the love of all that's holy, stop supporting these people who want you dead. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see y'all later. Bye.